Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. I'm Denise Vigno with Howard Center. It's a little bit of a gray day here in Burlington, but I expect we're going to be talking about kids, and I bet we'll have a few chuckles along the way. So welcome. We're really pleased to be talking about good beginnings for the youngest among us and how we as parents and caregivers can support the early childhood years as part of our World Mental Health Day speaker series. This is our third of 4 sessions. Last week, our guest, Ashley C. Ford, talked about her own mental health, including her unique perspective on finding balance and how it can really change day to day and even moment to moment. We know you'll be able to take away some tips and learnings from today's talk. As we continue to spotlight mental health, we want to acknowledge our frontline team here at Howard Center. Despite the stress and the strain of a 19-month pandemic, they've continued providing critical services to our community. Liz Mitchell, who you'll be hearing from shortly, and her team are part of that front line and have supported children and families all throughout. In fact, I remember early on in the pandemic when we knew less about spread and prevention strategies, hearing heartwarming stories about their team making home visits and reading stories to kids from outside through the window. In just a few minutes, we'll welcome Liz for today's conversation. But before we get started, we do want to take the opportunity to thank our sponsors who help to underwrite our events. You can see them all on the screen, and we want to give a special shout out to our advocate sponsors, the Marsh McLennan Agency, OnLogic, the University of Vermont Medical Center, and the White Light Foundation. We also want to offer a very special thank you to 2 of our longtime donors who are committed to supporting mental health in our community. They've generously offered a matching gift in recognition of World Mental Health Day. We're thrilled to have their support, which has helped us to raise over $50,000 during this campaign. Funds will support our mental health and crisis stabilization programs. If you'd like to contribute, visit howardcenter.org. And now just turning to a few housekeeping notes. For today's webinar, you won't have access to your audio, video, and chat functions, but we'll offer a Q&A session immediately following Liz's talk. You may also ask questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A function on your Zoom toolbar. We will be recording today's talk, and it will be available within a few days on our website. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Liz Mitchell. Liz is our Early Childhood Program Director at Howard Center. She's a licensed clinical social worker and a graduate of Bryn Mawr College School of Social Work and Social Research. Liz says she has proudly been a social worker supporting children, adults, and families for the past 38 years, first in Pennsylvania and now here in Vermont. She's been part of the early childhood program at Howard Center for the past 18 years, beginning first as a community-based clinician and then moving into the role of director. Liz, in her very humble way, says she has been privileged to walk beside many parents, children, early educators, and other colleagues during her time in Vermont, always focused on the importance of early childhood, social, emotional, and physical development as the stepping stone to healthy adulthood. She has enjoyed supporting and holding the many parents and caregivers in their lives. Please join me in giving Liz a warm welcome.
Hi, Denise, and thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and welcome to everybody that's joining us today. I'm so happy to have this opportunity to speak with you today about what mental health wellness looks like for young kids. And truthfully, wellness of young children cannot be discussed without really recognizing and truly amplifying the role of parents and other caregivers in that process. And I'm hoping to do that. And so with that said, in the next 30 minutes, my hopes are that first, I'll provide you with some context around the importance of the early childhood years in setting the stage for health and well-being throughout that individual's life. Secondly, I'd like to identify how we can support healthy emotional and social development in our young children. And last but never least, consider the importance of supporting the caregivers of young children. I will be using the term parent throughout this conversation, just really to simplify it. However, parent can be replaced with many, many wonderful words like grandpa, nana, auntie, teacher, any adult who really has been a primary caregiver in that young child's life. There's so many people that are important to children. Before I start with my presentation, I just want to offer a few other introductory remarks to all of you listening, and frankly, mainly to parents who are listening. Just wanted to keep a few things in mind. First, and probably not surprisingly, parenting is as hard as it really is wonderful. It doesn't come with a manual. Suddenly, and I remember this, suddenly you take on this role of caring for this little human being who is completely dependent upon you. Remember walking into my house the first day after coming home from delivering my daughter and had this moment of, oh my goodness, what is going on here? I'm not sure that I should be the one doing this. And then you find yourself in this constant observation, constant kind of detective work of identifying needs and responding to those needs. And at the same time, you're often fatigued from sleep deprivation. You may be feeling isolated, and even upon occasion, you may be experiencing some despair. Sometimes when I think about parenting young children, I think about exhaustion. And in my opinion, as both a clinician and a parent, and I think that probably there's a lot of fact in this, parenting has become increasingly complex as we move through generations. And a few of the reasons for this, in my opinion, are first, we're inundated with information through the web, through social media, and dare I even say through conversations like this, with information, tons of information about how to be the best parent, what is the best thing to do, how to create this picture perfect kind of situation. It's often conflicting information, and it's certainly daunting. We also are finding ourselves parenting often in isolation. With increased mobility in our world, let alone the pandemic, parents are often not living near extended family or friends. And today, statistically, 40% of the parents in the United States are raising their children on their own without the support of a partner. On top of that, parents are balancing their full-time responsibilities as a parent while often working long days outside at other jobs as well. And then, like I said a minute ago, just throw in the pandemic, which has just in many ways wreaked havoc on all of our lives in many ways and changed things for the past almost 2 years. My husband has a saying, and he's thrown it around in many ways through the years, and I think it really fits when we think about parenting in this era. And he describes it as, there is no such thing as normal. It is just a setting on your dryer. And I think that's true. I don't know what normal is, but I do think that there's things that we can do to support our kids. So the moral of this little introduction was for all those caregivers that are listening to please be kind to yourself on this journey. Even as we talk about ways you can support your children, is I'm sure that you're doing the best job you can, and that's all what we can actually do. So with that said, let's start with why is early childhood so important? And I think there was a time fairly long ago that babies, toddlers, and preschoolers were almost regarded as little adults. They should just have somehow been innately born with all of this understanding and should really just begin to figure out how to be in the world. They were often told to be seen and not heard, and just to manage. But the truth is that science and research has really taught us that of all the babies in the animal kingdom, human babies are the least hardwired. Their brains are malleable and very ready for learning and experiencing. So during the first few years of our lives, our social brain is really shaped, and our emotional style and our emotional resources are beginning to be established. And I really believe that this shaping and this growth is as important as physical health, and actually can be an important determinant of our physical health and emotional health into our adulthood. And children experience and regulate and express emotions during this time in their lives for the first time. And they do this by having close relationships and by exploring and by learning about their environment with the support of trusted caregivers and parents. Really, cognitive and emotional functioning essentially develops and organizes through engagement with people we encounter in our years. There's no magic thing. It's all of these experiences that come together. And science and research, especially in the last 20 to 15 years, has taught us that consistent, predictable, responsive, and kind interactions between young children and their parents literally and figuratively builds their brain. And that sometimes when I think about it can feel a little bit daunting, because I think it's easy as a parent to start saying, oh my, were all of my interactions consistent? Were all of my interactions kind? And the reality is, at least for myself, that probably isn't always the case. I'm pretty sure my adult children could speak to that now. And I think one of the things I was talking about with staff today were that these predictable, these responsive, these kind interactions, they don't come in these big elaborate ways. They come throughout each and every day in very small doses. Little kids experience things for 2 or 3 minutes, probably at the most, and those scattered throughout their days is great. Thinking that you have to, as a parent, figure out how to play and engage with your child for hours on end, it isn't the norm, and it probably isn't the best. It's really these dosing situations, which we'll talk about a little later. And so, as we think about the early childhood years and we think about what makes them well and what makes them successful, a lot of us over the years have learned to think about that in terms of how ready are kids for kindergarten. I think that's often a sentence that we hear in our program. And in the past, I think many of us, probably even including myself, measured that readiness by, do they know their ABCs? Are they reading? Are they even possibly doing some sight words? Because our kids, frankly, they're brilliant. But the reality is that being able to identify emotions and having the skills to manage your emotions, as well as the ability to engage in social interactions with other kids and adults, that's where success comes from. There's been several national studies done around this, and one of the relevant ones is Kaufman's Eager to Learn Neurons to Neighborhoods report, and it really discussed the importance of social and emotional development in children's readiness for and success in school. And the key factors they saw where kids had these wonderful social and emotional experiences were they came to school with confidence, with some positive self-esteem. They also had the capacity to join in and to have relationships with adults and with peers. They also have persistence, that even in this hard task or something new, they're going to persist with that and they're going to keep trying until they get it. And lastly, they have the ability to identify their emotions and to identify and utilize strategies that will help them manage those. And those are the things that this study has really found creates the opportunity and the bedrock for lifetime learning. And I think, again, as we proceed in this, we'll see that these interactions and these times with our children is what really creates this opportunity. So what are some of the supports that help to lead to healthy development in young kids? Social and emotional development isn't one thing we do. It takes place in the context of our family, of our community, and also with recognition around our own cultural experiences. And I want to take a moment to also just perhaps give a shout out to the early educators out there. they often play a huge role in our children's lives. I think that there probably are most of us have had our children engage in early education at some point between birth and 5. And these people are on the front line as we are as parents, providing this modeling and this coaching to our youngest children through their through their exciting, through their exploration with our kids. And so I like to remind all of us around that, because I think sometimes they're unsung heroes in our kids' lives. There's a world-renowned child psychologist that I like to think about when I'm having these conversations, and his name was Yuri Bronfenbrenner. I've practiced that name many times over the last 5 or 6 days. He was a professor at Cornell University and was really active almost until his death in 2005. And in the course of his career, he wrote a lot, he edited a lot, he co-authored various books around a field that he actually created called the ecology of human development. And in his free time, when he wasn't doing that, he actually also was a co-founder of Head Start, which makes a lot of sense when you listen to some of his theories and his beliefs. So throughout his years of research and throughout his years of teaching, Bronfenbrenner's basic tenet was that the trusting bond between parents and children are the most powerful force in positive development. And he stated in one of his writings, and I'm going to quote him, "Intellectually, emotionally, and socially, a child requires participation in progressively more complex reciprocal activities on a regular basis over an extended period of time in that child's life with one or more persons with whom that child develops a strong mutual emotional attachment and who is committed to that child's well-being and development." Those feel like a big statement, but the reality is that we're probably doing that many, many times a day. Dr. Bronfenbrenner translated this into a really simple, kind of powerful statement. And it's one that I've seen many times in presentations that I've done and that I've been to. And he said that every child needs at least one adult who is irrationally crazy about him or her. And when I think about that, it makes me smile, because the reality is we all need that. But a child needs to know that there's someone or some people in their lives that just think they're the greatest. So healthy, as Yuri says, and as we see from the research, really, healthy social and emotional development depends on that child having the strong, safe, and secure attachments to the adults. These can be parents, grandparents, kin, early educators, supportive friends, and they can come in and out of their lives, because there are some people that touch our lives for a year or 9 months, and that they can have an impact, as well as parents and grandparents who are often who are extended members of that support. So from the earliest moments of a baby's life, this is what it looks like. You nurture, you have somebody who's holding you, who's nurturing you, who's looking at you with such love, who changes your diaper, who feeds you, and who comforts you when you're distressed. And we regard those people not only as wonderful, but as co-regulators. We are the people that are showing those kiddos that they are safe, they are loved, and they'll be okay. And truthfully, babies are born with an expectation that stress will be managed for them. And they also, through the process of having these great attachments, learn to tolerate a certain amount of stress once they are confident that an attentive adult is available to them. And thus, that talks about that consistency and repetitiveness of some of our interactions. And so as a, a living example, a baby, a young child is comforted by their caregiver who holds, touch, and responds to them in a loving way. This literally creates and causes lots of receptors to form in that child's brain, which process stress hormones. So that's the beginning of that emotional regulation piece. They begin to create these receptors that are going to be available to them when something zigs and zags in their life, or something doesn't happen quite in the way that they've known it. And these receptors allow them, in more scientific words, to tolerate what scientists will call normal stress, since their brain has these consistent, safe interactions. I know I'm using that safe, consistent interactions a lot, but that really is what it comes down to. And interestingly, the number of receptors that a child will have around this are actually established often by around the age 4 to 5. And when I say that, I do say that with also the caveat that that doesn't mean they can't continue to grow that. It just becomes a little bit more difficult. Sometimes I think about it like children and languages. When children are very young, they can be multilingual. They can go back and forth between several languages, and they comprehend and understand them. As we get older, it becomes more and more difficult for us because our brain has kind of established itself and established some of those pathways. And so things that we can do so much more freely when we are kids, it takes a lot more work when you're a grown-up. So I think I see those receptors in a similar way. It doesn't mean that, oh my gosh, if I don't have plenty by 5, I'm doomed. It just means it probably takes a lot more work. And so as we go along and these babies age, as our babies age, these nurturing experiences, these opportunities are reflected really in the routines and the rituals that we have in all of our lives. And it happens in so many ways. You can probably name a million that I'm not thinking of. And those can be things like special bedtime routines, things that you do consistently in the evening, having dinner together as a family, even when kids are little and not talking a lot, just being in the presence in some kind of a routine way with people that they know and trust. Listening to music together, dancing, all of those things which are sensory based and actually create a rhythm of their own are all reinforcing to children and support them in their emotional development. Blowing bubbles is another lovely one. In fact, I still have bubbles by my telephone in my office. So on those days that I'm feeling a little stressed, I'll blow some bubbles, and it makes a difference. And I think I can remember those things being encouraged when I was a little girl myself. And again, I want to go back to, it isn't the intensity of these interactions. It doesn't mean they have to be hours or well thought out or planned and put on your calendar. These are these brief interactions we have throughout our day with our kids that we probably don't even think about, but that have so much meaning in their ability to develop the skills around regulation and attachment and socialization. And then as we head towards that preschool age, our experiences with them and our interactions begin to teach them more about how to be in the world, how to be social in the world, things like turn taking and sharing. They practice that with their special adults in their lives, and we do that all the time. I will say one of my favorite games as a child, and I'm shamelessly willing to say I continue to enjoy it as an adult, is Candyland. And, it's a fun game to play. It's not too complicated, which is also actually wonderful for both young children and older adults like myself. And during that time you're playing with your kiddo, while it's fun, you're teaching them to take turns. You're even teaching them to manage stress, because there's nothing worse than getting almost to the top of the Candyland pier and then getting a card that takes you back to the very beginning. And so through all of those experiences, even if they last 10 minutes and they're done, that makes a difference. Eventually, we'll coach these kids with other kids. We'll be part of that. But much of our work starts just as an adult with those kids. And I say that sometimes because sometimes I'll be in a setting and you see it coming. You see the one kid walking over and grabbing a toy from another one. Sometimes there's tears. Occasionally there's some hitting, perhaps even on occasion, a little biting at that point. And sometimes what I'll see across the room is an adult saying, with the best of intentions, remember, you just have to share. And the reality is, that's a concept and a construct that means very little to most kids. They're not born knowing to share. Frankly, if anything, I think as little kids, we think the world centers around us. So the thought of sharing that wonderful bunny with another person is frankly not one that comes to their minds. And so again, it becomes imperative for us to be part of those interactions as we can and to practice with them so that when we remind them to share, they have context for that and they've had experiences for that. And truthfully, if we try to do that with two kids the same age without an adult, it's not probably going to go that well. The reality is that the adults can be predictable. We can control our reactions. We can give these kids time to process. Peers don't do that for one another. I mean, really, if you take my bunny, I'm going to want that back immediately. I'm not going to do any conflict resolution with you. So once again, it really speaks to that every interaction teaches them something. Carolyn Stranton, who is a child psychologist, describes this, and I love this description, that every interaction we have with our kids is really creating a piggy bank for them. And we're always making every interaction that we make where we show them love, we show them caring, we teach them to share, are deposits into their emotional piggy bank. And so as they age and as they grow a little bit more independent of us and they have these experiences in the world, they have a bank to withdraw from. They have skills and they have confidence in themselves that they can be in this world and socialize and interact in a positive way. And so with all of that said, I think the next important piece is how do we support the caregiver? Because the reality is, and I don't think there's an easy way around this, the adults are the ones that really have the big job here. The kids are huge recipients of this, but we are the ones that are doing that work. And often I think when we become parents, we make this assumption that somehow we're just going to instinctually do this. It's going to be great. We don't need a break. I'm going to be a super parent. I'll figure this all out. And if I really haven't said it clearly at this point, the truth is that parenting and supporting young children is hard work. It is not easy. And I think that can be surprising for some of us at times because we may have wanted a child in our lives for so long. We remember playing as a kid and then we have one and we're like, oh, okay, this actually isn't what I thought it would be. In the United States today, 1 in 7 moms and 1 in 10 dads, partners, extended family members, including kin, foster, and adoptive parents, experience depression and anxiety during the first year of a child's life. And that happens to people of every age, every income level, race, culture, and experience. It doesn't discriminate around that. That's pretty daunting sometimes when I think about it. There also is a 2020 study done by Earls, and it was described recently in the Journal of American Academy of Pediatrics, and it notes that every year 400,000 infants are born in this country whose mothers are depressed. And they regard this as the most underdiagnosed obstetric complication in America. And while people experience depression and anxiety in a continuum, it's real and it happens. And it can happen at this time in your life where you think you should be the happiest, but it actually also can be an extremely stressful period. And these emotions are coming up for us, and the stress is coming up as we're engaged in the hard and really the crucial work of growing a child. So what do we do? How do we help that? I've thought a lot about this, and I feel like the answers may feel simple, but they're really true. Parents need access to support. That's number one. Throughout the time I've been here in the early childhood program, I've really learned, and as have my colleagues, that perhaps one of the most important things we do when we work with families is accompany them on this journey. We're accompanying parents on this journey with their children. We don't have all the answers. Sometimes we don't have any answers, but we have an ear, we have an ability to sit with them and to be with them through that process. People really need to be connected. One of the evidence-based therapies that we provide under our program is called parent-child interaction therapy. It occurs, a child and a parent are in one room, and a clinician is in an adjoining room with a one-way mirror. And the clinician is really providing support to the parent through earbuds. And the focus of that work is really to consistently, through that earbud, provide support to the parent, recognizing, celebrating, exploring ways that they can have healthy interactions with their kids. And, first of all, when I think about it, I'm always amazed by the vulnerability and the courage it takes for a parent to do that, because here is this other person watching them. But it is done in such an amazingly loving and supportive way to enhance that relationship. And the way we enhance a parent-child relationship is to support and enhance and provide support to parents as well. Caregivers really need deposits in their piggy banks too. One of the sayings we'll often tell families and parents are, you need to fill up your own bucket before you can fill up your child's. And it's something I think about. For any of us who've been on airplanes in the past, and probably most of us have, there's that part at the beginning where the stewardesses go over emergency procedures. And one of the things they'll talk about is when the oxygen masks come down, the adults should be putting theirs on first prior to the child's. And it really is a metaphor for what we're talking about today. If we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're not figuring out what we need and finding a way to get that and having supports available to us, we're not going to be able to get our oxygen mask on our child. And so what else can we do to support that process? And I think number one is building community. And again, I think the pandemic has emphasized that more. When we moved to Vermont 23 years ago, I remember filling out a paper within the first month or two of moving here for my daughter. And it was for the school, and it was a list for emergency contacts. And it clearly and boldly stated that they didn't want my name, they didn't want my number, they didn't want my husband's. They wanted somebody else in the community, somebody who was local, who they could contact if there was an emergency and we couldn't be reached. And I had this moment, perhaps longer than a moment, of recognition that I had nobody there. And that also I had been so lucky to have had my daughter and my stepdaughter's lives in early childhood in a community where I was surrounded by family and friends. And so it became really clear to me that I needed to figure out how to develop those relationships here. But it was a startling moment. And I often think about parents, especially during this pandemic, but actually at any time, who are parenting behind closed doors and who don't have supports and who maybe don't even know how to reach out. So I think it's imperative not only for parents to do their best to reach out if they can, but also for us as a community to think about people in this way. And I do think a side effect perhaps of the pandemic has been for all of us to recognize how important that can be. I live in a wonderful neighborhood that has changed in the last 10 years. It had gone from a community where most of us had children of the same age, and now they've all grown up, to a community where we are now finding that, frankly, we're the oldest ones in the neighborhood. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but it did. And we're welcoming new families into our lives. And it's an opportunity for us to welcome them and to be available to them. One of our neighbors who's very dear to us, they moved here. They have no family in this area, and they have 2 young children. In the last couple of years, they haven't been able to even see their family because of the pandemic. And I don't think it was intentional, but naturally, we've just really loved having those kids around. Frankly, if you're an empty nester like me and you're trying, because you know you're a clinician, that you shouldn't put pressure on your own children to have children, even though you think you'd be a pretty great grandparent, it's actually a way to kind of meet some of those needs, that loss of not parenting, but also just an opportunity to support some other people. I think simple gestures, and again, as trite as the sound, can make a difference too. One of the things that parents will tell me that we're working with is that one of their greatest fears and one of their strongest embarrassments is going to a grocery store and having their child have a temper tantrum and really, really feeling like people are looking at them with disdain and judgment. And I remember, I always try to remember that, because I think that again was this moment for me of, wow, to not have anybody who's in that ear telling you that you're doing a good job. And so, I do my best when I see that to give the person a smile. And if I can, to even say, you're doing a great job. This is super hard work. And again, sounds a little trite, sounds a little contrived, but honestly, I think it's worth it. I think any opportunities we have to have a sense of belonging with others is important. And lastly, I think as parents and as caregivers, we have to be honest with ourselves about our needs and stress. There's no shame in seeking support. I think, again, a side effect of the pandemic has hopefully been that people recognize that depression, anxiety, stress are real, and that it is okay to reach out, that we shouldn't feel that we need to handle this alone. Parents' health and well-being is paramount to the mental health wellness in their young children. And yet parenting is really inherently stressful. And so we need to know that we can reach out. And so, as a clinician, I say, talk to your friends, talk to your doctor, talk to your child's pediatrician. Sometimes your child's pediatrician is the one professional you're seeing. And it's okay to talk to them about the fact that this isn't maybe going as well as you'd like, or you thought this would feel different. Never discount your feelings, and don't let other people discount your feelings. If somebody does, move on to somebody else. That's just really important. And I think we all need to figure out what supports we need. And that can be anything from a friend coming over with a cup of coffee to seeing a doctor or receiving medication or therapy. None of us are immune to having that need. In the last year, I had the privilege of interviewing 5 parents of young children who had participated in a parenting group that we offered through our agency. And I was able to interview them to just ask about that experience and what was helpful, what wasn't, what their feeling was. They were amazing women, first of all, and they all indicated that being with other parents and being able to share both their challenges and their successes was the most impactful and powerful aspect of that group. They all said, yeah, they learned some things. They learned there was a psychoeducational component. They learned more, maybe some of the things we've talked about today. But feeling part of a community of peers was the most important in supporting their own mental health and that of their child. So while, again, as I wrap up, well, it's a little cliche to say, I really do think it takes a village to raise a child. And we really need to support and empower their caregivers the best we can. I'd like to end just with a short paragraph by David Brooks, who wrote a book, The Social Animal, The Hidden Source of Love, Character, and Achievement. And I think it speaks to maybe everything I've talked about in a very condensed form. If there is one thing developmental psychologists have learned over the years, it is that parents don't have to be brilliant psychologists to succeed. They don't have to be supremely gifted teachers. Most of the stuff parents do with flashcards or special activities or tutorials to hone their kids into these really perfect kiddos, they don't have really much effect at all. Instead, parents just have to be good enough. They have to provide their kids with stable and predictable rhythms. They need to be able to fall in tune with their kids' needs, combining warmth and limit setting. They need to establish the secure emotional bonds that kids can fall back upon the face of stress. They need to be there to provide living examples of how to cope with the problems of the world so that their children can do the same. So thank you so much for taking this time with me, and hopefully it was informative and interesting, and I'd love to hear any questions or comments you might have.
Liz, thank you so much. That was wonderful. Really, you're incredibly knowledgeable and offered some really kind of common sense, practical tips and offerings for us to walk away with. I'm going to make sure I have Candyland at home for when my little nieces and nephews come over.
I have it in my car. It travels wherever I go. It's actually my Candyland from, well, let's see, almost 60 years ago, I might say. Still in good shape.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
We do have a few questions in the Q&A, so I will go through and ask them. We have a few minutes left, so that's great. So the first is, how do you suggest new parents go about keeping a toddler involved when they are having a new baby, especially when the toddler has gotten used to being an only child?
Yes. Well, I think if the child isn't born, I think, you can do there's lots of great books out, first of all, lots of nice little kind of social stories around being a big brother or being a big sister, and really just preparing them for that and talking about how they can be involved. One of the things that I often see, and I think sometimes parents worry about it, but it's totally natural, is that the older sibling, when a baby is born, suddenly that older child will want to be held, perhaps will want to have a bottle again, will want to do some of those things that they're now watching their new baby brother or sister doing. And so that's fine, because frankly, they're going to use the bottle for a little time and then they're going to say, this is not worth it. I really would rather just drink from a sippy cup again. And so I think allowing them to still have that time to be a baby, and to give them some of those moments is really important. I think it's very different for every kid too. Sometimes they really like their sibling and sometimes they don't. But I think encouraging them to be involved in the process and also just recognizing that, and acknowledging that it might be hard a little because they've been the only child. Hopefully that helps a little bit, but it is definitely a process.
Thanks, Liz. Liz, nationally, we're talking about a lot of different programming and supports that might come to fruition for children and families. What do you think about pre-K? And what does that mean to you or to us?
Yeah, well, this is probably something that I love to talk about. I really believe that having experiences between birth and 5, especially in those between 3 and 5 with other children your age in some formal way is really great for kids. Honestly, I believe that childcare and early education should be viewed in much the same way that our public schools are viewed, and that we should have that option for kids from birth on. Frankly, because I think parents need that, and I think children can learn from that. And I also believe that we probably don't value early education. We don't actually value early education in the way that we should. Those opportunities are great. I also know plenty of parents who, or many parents who choose not to do that, and that's fine. But then I do think it's so important to have opportunities to engage with other peers and join a play group or go to some activity where other kids are involved, especially as they hit that 3 to 5 age. I just think they need to practice with other kids once they've gotten those skills with their parents. But yeah, I could talk a long time about childcare and early education. I would love to see that be part of what we offer as part of our public education system to kids.
And just would you see that being right in the schools? Or
no? I don't think so. I mean, there's wonderful early education programs throughout our area, although I think probably all of us realize that the pandemic has brought some significant losses to those programs as well. It's hard to retain staff. No, I actually just feel like probably things should be publicly funded. It maybe is a little bit too radical, but I would like that to be something that people can count on with their kids, and that we provide the support and the education that early educators need to be able to do that the best too. And while I'm on that topic, I also really believe that, in my world, businesses would be working even around hourly people who are in stores and things, working with parents to figure out how you make a workable schedule and don't have to have your children in care more than 8 hours a day. Not because it's terrible, but because it's just stressful for everybody. And I just feel like, gosh, we'd all be so much better off if our employment allowed us some flexibility. And I say that humbly, because I know that that's not easy, but in my dream world, that's what I'd love.
That's great. Thanks. There's some other questions here. As a FCC, as a first call for Chittenden County triage clinician, what are some suggestions we can offer to parents when we are talking on the phone for the first time with them and they are with their child that may be experiencing a crisis? We have seen an increase in these calls, and the children seem to be younger and younger.
Yeah. I think that, yeah, I mean, I think we've all seen that. And I think my theories are partially that that's just a reflection of the stress that we're all under. And also, I think a growing probably willingness for people to reach out and recognize that they're dealing with stress. I feel like we have to do our best to focus on the parent. Again, especially when I'm thinking about these kids 5 and under, because it comes back to the piece that we have to be their co-regulators, and we have to figure out a way to bring ourselves to a place to be able to be available to them. They read our cues so well. I mean, sometimes, they read our cues sometimes to take advantage of us a little. They know when we're at our tired point and we say, yeah, you can watch, well, I would have said Gilligan's Island, but some show over again. But I think that we find so much of our work needs to be with the parent because they're just managing so much stress. So in those calls, I think, even though sometimes I think parents aren't always happy with us, we'll be saying to them, we need to help you bring it down. We need for you to be calm so that you can interact with your child. And sometimes, honestly, it means just changing it up, whatever is going on. Like the beauty about little kids are you can almost move on to something, and that will oftentimes almost confuse them, but move them on at the same time. And so using, helping that parent to calm enough to be able to say, what does your kid like to do? And what could you move into right now? And letting go of whatever that struggle was, because oftentimes it's some power struggle that brought you to that place. And that's long gone at this point. Nobody even knows what you're talking about anymore. You're just in it with them. And so I think it's often helping parents take some breaths and then maybe distracting. And I know that's, again, sounds simplistic. It isn't always going to work, but I find distraction, humor, those things can go a long way with a little kid.
Those are wonderful suggestions. Another question. Thanks for your obvious commitment to kids and families. Any thoughts about the community support opportunities for families with children who are homeless?
Wow, that's a really good question. I don't know what all of those opportunities are. I know in the past, and again, the pandemic has maybe changed a little of this, unfortunately, but I know if we're thinking about what can we do in those moments is like, I think cots in some of the places where kids and families may be living, look for volunteers sometimes to provide just some activity and some normalcy to young children. It's hard. And again, as hard as it is for anybody to be homeless, it goes again back to how do we support those adults? Because if we can just help them create some rituals and routines, even in this difficult time, it has an amazing strength. I also think that's a time when, we talk about early education and childcare. It's great for a kid to be able to be part of an early education program in the midst of being homeless, because it's grounding. It's grounding for those kids. It gives them a place that's consistent. I think we often see kids and families that they spend a month in one hotel and then they need to move for the next month. And I remember little kids like getting on the bus to go to a school district, like a pre-K program, and not knowing where they were going to get picked up that day. And it's something else, but it's just hard to imagine. And yet just having those places in their life where they have a person or a place that feels consistent can help through that process.
Really thoughtful, Liz. Here's another question. This is a question specific to the pandemic. I often hear people wondering if there will be a negative impact on a child's social development because they have been surrounded by adults wearing masks and missed out on seeing facial expressions such as smiles. What are your thoughts?
I do think there's some truth to that, because so much of us we express ourselves through that way. Interestingly, we've been able to purchase, and I think many programs at Howard Center have been able to purchase see-through masks so that they can still see at least some of our facial expressions. But yeah, I think that's really hard. One of the clinicians I work with was telling me that it was a young mom who had her baby in the last 9 months. So again, only knew a world where masked people came, and frankly, what was pretty isolated in her home. And the clinician went to visit this mom, and this child just cried and screamed the whole time that she was there. And I think it was because her experiences was having somebody in her home were perhaps none up until the point that we came in. And I think it's been hard. I don't think that I think kids are resilient and flexible. And I think if we give them whatever opportunities we can, that can make a difference. But yeah, we've been able to use some different kinds of masks, which I think have been helpful, because so much of our work, so much of the time we spend with kids are based on those interactions, what we're watching with each other. And another thing you could do is we've done this with kids all the time, and I see early educators do this, is hold up mirrors to kids and have them say, give me a smile, or what does it look like when you're angry, or what do I look like when I'm angry, and begin to help them just make those connections, even if it is a parent and a child alone. But I think we've definitely seen some kids who have struggled, but I've also been amazed by the resilience of kids. We thought that they would never wear masks. Frankly, little kids are better around wearing masks than some adults I know. They just do it. They even forget to take them off. I never forget to take mine off. So they're pretty amazing.
You're absolutely right. We see them running around the neighborhood and riding their bikes in masks, and always just get a chuckle there. They do just seem so resilient.
They are.
A few more here. Often children have stressful experiences that are beyond our control, such as an illness or a death in the family of a family member, or stress in the home due to a divorce or job loss. What can caregivers focus on that will help the child heal and move past that experience?
I really appreciate that, because as I do this conversation with you, I also want people to know that even when they do go through these stressors and things, because we all do to some degree, and some are bigger and feel bigger than others. Again, kids are very resilient, and it doesn't mean they're not going to be okay. But I think, again, it probably depends on what you're talking about, but I really do think I love the use of things like social stories, like creating a little book about something that's happening. And what I found over the years are sometimes kids love stories about themselves, but that are really told from an animal's point of view. I feel like it's something that makes them feel a little less vulnerable. And so talking to kids about, wow, I heard about this little dog whose grandpa dog died, and he's feeling sad, and what do you think about that? And create those opportunities for kids to just talk about it, because again, I'm always amazed by kids' ability to have those conversations. I think as adults we get afraid and we don't want to make them feel worse, but I think you feel worse when you don't get to talk about it, and you can talk about it in this very just curious way. And you can also say that you're feeling sad and model those things. I was in a childcare once where the kids were all sitting having lunch together. And it was one of the kids said, my grandpa just died. And I could see the teacher being like, oh no, what are we going to do here? And I just looked at her and said, just wait. And the reality is this little group of 4 or 5-year-olds went around saying, yeah, my grandpa died, or yeah, this happened to me and it was sad. And they all acknowledged it. And then this one little kid, probably will be a therapist someday, ended it by saying, my mom told me that my grandpa or my grandma will always be in my heart. And then they were like, yeah. And they went on eating their lunches. And I think, again, like giving them those opportunities, creating stories, and just telling them when we're sad, it's all okay.
Liz, we've got a few that we're not going to be able to get to. So I think we'll have time for just one more. Brittany, would you go ahead and try to catalog these so that we can get back to people if possible? I think there's just one or two more we might not get to. Someone asks if you think it's possible to make up for lost time with the pandemic. I'm worried that not having much time during the pandemic with extended family and close friends will have a lasting negative impact on my toddler and his relationships as he gets older. Do you think we can make up for lost time? Is resilience really kind of all a part of this?
Yeah, I think resilience really is a part of this. And I don't think that probably any of us would be in the work we're doing if we didn't believe in that, because the pandemic has been just life altering for many of us. But I do think kids will just relish those celebrations and those opportunities to be with extended family again. I think they'll just embrace it in a way. I watched that with my little neighbors next door who got to see their grandparents for the first time. And I think the youngest was a baby when they last saw their grandparents, and they just enjoyed it for what it was. Maybe they enjoy it even a little more because it just feels so special and so novel. I think, they can, I don't even say it's overcome. I think that they can process those things. I think we just have to trust that process ourselves sometimes. And they'll be okay. I think it's been interesting because I think we expected to see a lot of difficulty with kids going to childcare for the first time or going to kindergarten after not having had any experiences with peers for a while too. And again, across the board, kids have done remarkably well. Maybe they're just so happy to be with other people at this point. But that's part of it too, that it's all new and exciting. So yeah, again, I never want to minimize a parent's concern. And I think that we all have those kinds of concerns, but I've been amazed by the resilience and the ability for kids to just enjoy. Could they be shy around their grandparent who they haven't seen in 2 years and they're only 4? Absolutely. But that'll change.
Liz, this has really been wonderful. Thank you for all of your knowledge, your compassion, your common sense kinds of suggestions you've made to us. Really, really appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
I do want to just thank our viewers who are in the office, who are at home, for joining us today. Thank you very much. We do have Compassion Fatigue next Thursday, the 28th from 1 to 2:30. We'll be hosting our clinician Beth Goss, and please join in if you're able. You can register at howardcenter.org. And then, of course, we have resources at